Good morning. I'm Rabbi Haim Beliak. I'm pleased to welcome you to a program that we are very excited to present, discussing the book, The Crooked Mirror by Louise Steinman. I'm going to be co-hosting with Marek Jozowski, who is in Poland and is the chair of Beit Polska, the progressive Polish community. I serve as the volunteer executive director for Friends of Jewish Renewal, which supports Beit Polska. We're very pleased to be beginning this series. This is the second in a series entitled Freighted Legacies, opportunities to explore the history, the culture, and the experience of Jews and Poles across many centuries. This is a program that's being recorded, and I'm going to turn to my colleague Marek to invite him to introduce this specific program and our panelists and the author.
Thank you very much, Haim. From across the Atlantic, a warm welcome. But also to all of the Polish listeners, because this session is made available particularly to English speakers as well as non-English speakers, or specifically Polish speakers in Poland. There are at least two reasons for that. One is that this series has been established in order to bring closer Jews to Poland and the Jews not living in Poland to Poland, and also help Poles understand the Jewish view of their history and of the intertwined history, Polish-Jewish history, particularly of the recent past, but not only of the recent past. And second reason is that we are today specifically discussing a topic or a subject matter of, as the subtitle of our book says, Polish-Jewish Reconciliation, or Polish-Jewish relations that seek to find reconciliation between the two, one could say, groups, but people, humans, with a joint history on many, many points. Let me immediately move to the subject matter. Today, we have chosen to introduce to you, promote in some sense, a book which, please correct me, Louise, which originally came out in English in 2016 or 15?
13, actually, 2013.
Yes, which actually was, we picked up and found to be strong enough in its message, strongly positive in its message, to really push for its translation into Polish, which, with some support of Beit Polska, which was mentioned by Haim, but also from individual conviction of the translator, Dorota, who is with us today, and the author, has ultimately found its way into the Polish language, and it was published by the KARTA Center publishers, and more than publishers, a distinguished institution in Poland. I will describe it later. This May of this year, 2021. Now, let me immediately say that we want to, we have invited you into a conversation between the author, Louise Steinman, and for those that need introductions, I will briefly share her bio, but also share the other speakers today. So Louise Simon, welcome. Louise is more than just a writer. She is an artist and literary curator, which I've had a personal experience of seeing when I met her in Lublin and in Warsaw some time ago. She has written and supported art projects that focus particularly on memory, recent history, and effort to reconciliation between those who may not necessarily understand one another because of backlog of misunderstanding, of being isolated from one another by history or by choice, or by both. She is published widely. She has also written through syndication of many major American periodicals and dailies. I will not mention them in detail, but she has also focused on biographies, particularly of people who have contributed much to the subjects of great importance to her. In other words, man-to-man understanding and throwing bridges across divides. Let me stop at that, Louise, and you will have more opportunities to give us insights into your things important for you and what makes you tick, so to speak. And I will move to Kathleen Bagley, who will be, we hope, a good partner questioning Louise in her efforts to share with us the logic, the drive behind putting down on paper her reflections on Polish-Jewish realities of recent past. Kathy Bagley is a academic and West Coast academic. When I look at her bio, this includes UCLA, UC San Diego, and California State University, tenured positions of professorship. She is a professor of literature, which is important to stress here, and she has focused on a number of literary expressions of intercultural meeting places and on minority cultures. She has also traveled widely, including travel to Poland, when she took an early opportunity of Poland opening up and sign up for a Fulbright supported teaching position in a Polish university where she taught American literature to Polish students. This was, I presume, early 1990s. This was a great effort and contribution from American free world to nascent democracy of Poland back then. Finally, I would say that I would add that Kathy, and she will talk to that, I'm sure, in detail, has her own personal reasons for undertaking the subject. She is, in a sense, engaged. She herself has been engaged in exploring the Polish-Jewish relations because of her family, because of her father's Polish-Jewish descent or origins, and the fact that she needed to explore that. She felt a need to explore that and understand that better in her own biography and her family's history. Thank you, Kathy, for agreeing to engage in this discussion. Let me move to another important person, Dorota Golebiewska, who served as the translator of the book. She found it engaging enough and important enough from her perspective to want to translate it even when there was no money available to actually cover for the costs of the translation. And her perspective is unique also. She is Polish and a Polish multiculturalist, I would call her, if you allow me, Dorota, because she is in her career as a journalist, reporter, and translator, but also as a reporter for the International Organization for Migrations, has explored the issues of minorities, both remaining minorities in Poland, including Roma and the Jewish minority, but also Polish minorities that have been thrown by winds of history to Central Asia, the Soviet Central Asia. Poles who were shipped from the eastern outer reaches of Poland into Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in early 1940s. And she has documented both their existence there and their desire to repatriate to Poland, and then the actual settlement of these migrants in Poland. So thank you for attending, and we will be also asking you, Dorota, to share your experience of translation of this important book. Moving on to the publishers. Publishers are represented by Hanna Antos, editor extraordinaire, who has helped us prepare the book for publication, and has done that in an incredible way as she continues to support a number of important series within her publishing house. As for those who don't know what KARTA Center stands for, it's not just a publisher. They are a powerhouse of bringing to the attention of Poles it's their recent history. And specifically, they have been in the business of filling up the gaps in history, which have been caused by post-war Soviet-controlled socialist states historiography. In other words, the blind spots in the awareness of Poles about their history, they have been filling that up initially as clandestine publishing house in 1980s or even maybe earlier. But then since 1989, they've been publishing a huge number of these books officially that are memoirs, that are analytical papers, researched books about Poland's history of resistance, of survival, but also, and now I'm coming to the final point that I want to make about Hanna. She has been a leader for a series that KARTA has started, I believe, more than 5 years ago, which is a book series called The Polish Jews. And this series actually has, I think, close to 20 titles now. They've published or republished important memoirs of Polish Jews, particularly the Shoah time memoirs, which has really put that on the shelves of many Poles. As a result, we are filling that gap as well. So she was uniquely placed to actually choose our book. I say our, but it's Louise's book on Poland's bookshelves. Thank you for that, Hanna. And handing over to Haim after my lengthy a lengthy introductions so that we can proceed with the actual discussion.
Thank you, Marek, and very important for us to have the background of our panelists. I want to invite Louise to share with us some of her reaction to what it means for her now to have this book in Polish and to, in a sense, have the dialogue that she began essentially addressing an American audience and an American Jewish audience, now joined by having a Catholic and a Jewish Polish audience and many others who are reading Polish, how she feels and the reception. I know you've been getting the translations of the reviews and so forth.
Thank you, Haim, and thank you all of you for being here today. It's very moving. It was a long time wish that this book might appear in a Polish edition, and over the years, I think we tried, and it really have to give a lot of credit to Dorota and to Haim and the Beit Polska for their determination. But Dorota also kind of just said, I'm translating it. And it's also very touching because Dorota is also a character in the book. We met at the origin of the book, which was at the Bearing Witness retreat at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And Dorota was the translator at that gathering. So we had that deep connection. So it's very moving to learn how people are processing it now in Polish, which I think is it just makes so much sense that it has a potential for a Polish audience now, and KARTA has done an amazing job. It's just been such a joy working with them. So this is a group effort. It takes a village, and I'm kind of astonished that here we all are. It really was a community effort to bring this into being.
I'm going to turn actually first to Kathleen Bagley to invite her to respond to her reading of the book, keeping in mind that Kathleen has herself published a very extensive reflection on her 2 years plus of being in Poland. Kathy was physically 2 years in Poland, but for many years involved with Poland as a part of her life and Polish culture. So I want Kathy first to ask you to respond to Louise's book and your reading of it, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Haim. Look, Louise's book is brilliant. It's a bombshell. It's just such a pleasure for me to have read it. And I want to make a couple corrections, if you don't mind, Marek, because I was actually living in Poland from 87 to 89. So it was just before the wall came down. And so I was living in, the thick of communist Poland and teaching Polish students. And the thing to know, of course, is that the subject of Polish-Jewish relations was essentially taboo at that time. And so, I left just really after the roundtable talks, and went to my position at Cal Poly at that time. So reading Louise's book now is like this powerful statement of hope, the saviors of Atlanta, the Grodzka Gate, mystery, Borderlands Foundation. I mean, Louise provides the hope that in my book, I say, I went to Poland to begin with to try to rescue hope. So she now provides this. Now, there's many ways to respond to Louise's book literarily, and literature is my field. And there's so many wonderful tropes in this book. I would point to just a few before we get into, I don't know, I guess you could call it the politics of the book. Using Cheryl as a foil, her friend, Cheryl, who said, I'm afraid I can't go, I can only do so much, was extremely artful and just very, very important in the book because it represents so many Jewish Americans I know who I've addressed at various talks about Poland, where there's just a pushback. They don't want to hear, they say it's live flesh. they don't want to hear. And the use of the power of dreams throughout. And there were times when I got chills, of course, reading Louise's book, where her dreams were prescient. She already knew about the Grodzka Gate to some extent. So I wonder now, given what we have in Poland, regrettably, with the Law and Justice Party, where and how this wonderful translation will fall on the ears of Poles. Will it be a reawakening? Because when I left, there was this wonderful decade plus of awareness of breaking the taboo. And now we have the closure. You know, we have the situation with Jan Gross and with the government taking away his medal and so forth. I don't know if it was reinstated or not. Where do we stand now? I also want to correct the pronunciation of my name, because words are so important here. It's Bagley, Bal like B-A-A-L from the Hebrew. So it isn't Bagley, it is Bagley. And the first part is Hebrew, the second is Yiddish. Took me a long time to find this name. And it really means owner of faith. So I guess I had some rabbis back in the day, and they're all from Vitebsk or Brześć, or now Brest, or formerly Brest-Litovsk. I have so many things to say about Louise's book. The fact that the past keeps changing, the Bashirt in finding Esther Wilhelm Tepper, the beads as a memory keeper, so powerful, almost like a method of systematic inquiry or of remembering what not to forget. I also had to think of Roberta Grossman's film, Who Will Write Our History, about the so-called Zamlers and Zamling that Louise points to. You know, where to start? You go looking for history, and history turns up practically in your own backyard, was exactly my experience in writing my book. So in a way, my book is a prequel, if you will, to Louise's wonderful book. It shows how we weren't allowed and the pushback that we got and how things have changed. So I guess I'll stop there with the hope that I get to talk again, because I want to talk about the seer. I want to talk more about how the seer is the climax, if you will, for me, the resolution, the answer to the question, the observance of absence. That finally, no matter what, with the manholes and the lights and the shape of the parking lot being an eye, how no matter what, history will find its way of resurfacing. I guess I'll stop there now with the hope that I get to say more, because I have so much to say about Louise's wonderful book.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Indeed, you will. And I want to turn to Dorota, who, excuse me, Dorota, who lived with this book and is in many ways, as has been remarked, the person that made the Polish translation possible, to get some of the reflections that she has about the significance of the book, as a Pole, as a person who's been concerned about minority voices in the Polish community. And you're a participant, and I don't think we could begin in a better place than to recall that Rabbi Don Singer is not only Louise's person that moved her into the interest of going to Poland, but was a mentor of mine when I became a young rabbi. So we owe a great deal to him. Tried to get him to join us, but unfortunately, I don't think he is with us today. He's retired in New Mexico. Dorota, let me turn to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. I must say I'm really overwhelmed, because when I first went to Berean Retreat, to Berean Witness Retreat in Auschwitz, I never really imagined it will end up and probably continue in such a way. both in my private life and on the more public scene. As you mentioned Don, I would also like to say that Don was a very important person to me too. I met him in Auschwitz for 3 times, as I went to the retreat 3 times for 3 consecutive years. And I feel very personal connection to him, and I think whatever happened would not have been possible without him. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank him, whether he's listening or not. I just hope this message somehow reaches him, hoping someone will bring it to him anyway. When I first read the book, it was when Louise came to Poland to meet, to have a meeting in Polin Museum and present the book in English. And when I first read it, it was very overwhelming to me, because to me it brings like a lot of personal memories from the retreat, where I went as a participant. I never went there as a translator. It just happened on the way that I started to translate, but I was not a professional translator then, and I was not invited as a translator. I was just a participant, and they needed me to translate. And then I did translate the book because it was so important to me, and also I felt it would be very important to other people. At some point in the beginning of the book, Louise says that she's very eager to learn a language which we could share, to speak about our different perspectives, our different experiences, our different feelings, in such a way as to open more ways to understand each other and to communicate to each other, and not close, not to build walls, but to bring them down in the way we communicate, being aware of all the differences and all the difficult feelings and difficult points in history that we also share. And as I was reading this book, I realized that she did find this language, and this book is the language. It's like the medium is the method, right? This book is this language, and I was really very eager to translate it to my language and to share it with people who cannot read it in English. And obviously I was aware that publishing it in Poland would really make it much more impactful and much more accessible for the Polish audience, even for those who could actually read it in English, but they didn't know they should. So I was really very happy to do that. I think I would also like to stress what Louise said about connection. I think she has such a deep connection to both sides of the dialogue at this moment. And what is really touching is her honesty in dealing with both sides of the dialogue, so that each one of us can feel accommodated and more courageous, more ready to make a few steps back, to give some more space to the other side, whoever the other side is. I think this book is a great lesson in dialogue and in talking to people with whom we share only a part of the story. And it shows us how to open to the other part of the story, which we do not necessarily share.
Thank you. Thank you, Dorota. We've had a request, since not everybody has had a chance to read the book, for a bit of a synopsis. And I'm going to ask Kathy to do that in a moment, but I want to invite Hannah. Maybe you would like to also give a synopsis. By the way, to the native Polish speakers, Hanna and Dorota, you can speak in Polish, and we will listen to the English. So you are free to feel at ease. That part of the technology is that we want people to speak in the language they're most at ease in. Though your English is fine. I want to add that. Hanna?
Dobrze, w takim razie ja będę mówić po polsku i bardzo dziękuję za to zaproszenie. Dla nas w KARTA książki to był naprawdę zaszczyt i przywilej, bardzo, bardzo ważna rzecz. Może opowiem, jak trafiliśmy na ten tekst, bo tak jak powiedział Marek, my zajmujemy się 30 lat wydawaniem literatury non-fiction. Wydajemy wspomnienia, dzienniki, listy, zapisy bezpośrednich świadków. I dla nas najważniejsze jest doświadczenie pojedynczego człowieka. Ale do tej pory skupialiśmy się na doświadczeniach jakby ludzi z przeszłości. A teraz dociera do nas coraz bardziej i coraz bardziej nas to interesuje, żeby zrozumieć, jak przeszłość wpływa na drugie i trzecie pokolenie świadków, na dzieci i wnuki tych ludzi, którzy przeżyli zagładę, czy jakoś byli jej świadkami. Więc mieliśmy w sobie taką teoretyczną gotowość na to, żeby szukać takich tekstów pisanych przez drugie i trzecie pokolenie. Natomiast praktycznie był to w pewien sposób, mogę nawet powiedzieć, coś na kształt cudu, bo Dorota Golebiewska, której jesteśmy bardzo wdzięczni za przesłanie nam tej propozycji, zwróciła nam uwagę na tę książkę i przesłała plik tłumaczenia już na polski dosłownie 3 dni po tym, kiedy ja zupełnie przez przypadek znalazłam informacje o tej książce w internecie. Więc śmiałyśmy się nawet z Louise, że to sam rabin Shlomo Rabinowicz, XIX-wieczny cadyk z Radomska, czuwa trochę nad losem tej książki. I po lekturze natychmiast ja i koleżanki w redakcji byliśmy przekonani, że to jest tytuł, który powinien zostać wydany po polsku. Zdecydowanie nie mieliśmy żadnych wątpliwości. Często nad różnymi propozycjami wydawniczymi dyskutujemy, zgadzamy się bądź nie, mamy różne w redakcji opinie. Tu byliśmy zdecydowanie jednomyślni, znaczy byliśmy przekonani, że to jest czas, żeby taki tytuł, taką książkę w Polsce wydać. Jesteśmy też Louise za ten zapis bardzo, bardzo wdzięczni.
I'm appreciative of your efforts, Hanna, and I am looking at the chat, and people are asking for a summary of the book. People who have not had a chance to read it. It is going to be a little difficult, and I don't want to ask Louise to be on the spot for this. I'm going to put Kathy on the spot for this, since she's already referred to many of the things that are, I think, of significance.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is a tall order. I hope you will all read the book, because it is just a pleasure. I've read it several times, and every time I find something new to admire in it. But in terms of a synopsis, let me see, and I hope that Louise will approve of what I'm going to say.
And she'll speak up.
Right, she'll speak up and correct me, and add to and subtract as is needed. It starts out with something that I faced, which is Poland. Why would anyone go there, especially if you're Jewish? That land of ashes, as my father called it. When I accepted my Fulbright, he said, well, you're young, I guess that's what you want to do. In the case of Louise's book, she talks about this rabbi who you all know, who said, I think Poland gets a bum rap. A bum rap, Louise thought, given how she was raised, and in particular, her mother's view of Poland, which is an understandable one and deserves respect. This is the thing. When I would go from place to place to talk, and I would get that, I had to accept that. So Louise decides that really a bum rap, let's find out. And she first goes from this experience at the camps, where she met Dorota, and then from there goes on this journey of trying to actually investigate and interrogate this notion of Polish anti-Semitism, Polish collusion, Jewish overreaction, particularly American Jewish overreaction anti-Poland. And chapter by chapter, she takes us to these different places, literally different places. She travels and shows us the sorts of things that are going on that will undermine our previous notions about antipathy between Poles and Jews. I mean, I was just filled with joy and pleasure because the Poland I lived in was not this Poland. There was not the kind of projects that Louise relates. And I guess in the end, what we get, as I said, there is an observance of absence. We do find out. And the fact that this is being translated and has been translated into Polish for Poles to read is like my finest wish, that this is what I tried to say to my students. You don't need to apologize for your country necessarily. Victims don't like to be accused of being victimizers, but you must acknowledge and you must seek. And I love the beginning in the book that Louise dedicates to her mother. For my mother, Anne Weisskopf Steinman, who believed we must always inquire. So even though her mother had all of these very negative feelings about Poland, she did say we must inquire. And that's exactly what this book does. There is so much here. The Odd Believers. Did I give a good synopsis, Louise?
Yes, no, you did great. And I was thinking, picking up on something you said, Kathy, about, victims don't like to be seen as victimizers. And, we have a whole, a moment that's opening up here in the United States where we're trying to look at our own fraught history with how slavery changed this country, shaped this country, and what is our responsibility to our own history. And a lot of it's very difficult history to look at, and there's a lot of pushback to that. So I think all that sense of, and I've been really struck, like that phrase you mentioned, my mother couldn't even say the word Poland, which I mentioned in the book, and how hurtful that has been to some Polish readers when that was excerpted. And I thought, oh my, and then I can really understand why we're hearing things that are difficult to hear and how we perceive each other. And that's another layer that we have to kind of push through. And I mean, Hannah, you certainly have been, you've seen some of the response, and, told me in the beginning, like, don't be disturbed by it. Some people are very rattled by it, but I'm sure you've gotten a lot of interesting feedback from Polish audiences.
Reakcji właśnie od polskich czytelników, i one są w większości pozytywne, a przynajmniej takie do nas docierają, ale jest też grupa ludzi, która nie jest gotowa jeszcze na taki głos i na takie zmierzenie się z tym widzeniem nas przez drugą stronę. Dlaczego tak jest? Nie ma pewnie na to jednej odpowiedzi. Dlaczego jesteśmy tak podzieleni? To wynika pewnie i z wielu dekad historii, ale też z dzisiejszego podziału, który jest w Polsce bardzo wyraźny i społecznie, i politycznie. No i wydaje nam się, że naszą rolą jako wydawcy jest zasypywanie tego podziału poprzez dawanie ludziom narzędzi do tego, żeby na własną rękę jakby poznali drugą stronę, głos drugiej strony i sami spróbowali przekroczyć ten podział. I właśnie książka Louise jest takim narzędziem, które daje pewną nadzieję na to, że przekroczenie tego podziału jest możliwe. I ja chciałam od razu, korzystając z okazji, zapytać Louise, bo dla mnie ta książka jest pełna nadziei i rozumiem, że Louise, ty byłaś pełna tej nadziei, pisząc ją i wydając w 2013 roku w Stanach. Ale co byś powiedziała dzisiaj, w 2021 roku? Jakby, czy ta nadzieja jest na jakimś innym poziomie? Czy widzisz, ile się zmieniło i czy to się zmieniło na lepsze, czy na gorsze?
I'm worried. I worry about Poland. I hold in my heart the people who are doing this important work. Everyone who's trying to speak up for human rights in Poland. I have LGBTQ friends who felt that it was safer to move away. There's a new scapegoat in Poland. It's a very, very difficult time. And that's why I was like, really, we're going to publish this book into this climate? And I thought that was very brave of KARTA to decide this was the moment and to push for this now. And that's an interesting thing. The idea of coming back and speaking, in Poland is different than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. But I still believe there are people of good heart everywhere who really want to have this dialogue. Just like in this country, we have a terrible divide right now, and we're suffering a similar kind of pressure, even to the point of, there's pushback on teaching history in the schools of what happened in our own history. So this is a pushback that's happening all over the world in different countries with this history. Dorota, maybe you want to reflect on that a little bit in terms of this moment, how you feel about it.
I'm afraid I'd be repeating myself, but as I said, I think when there is a conflict, you need a dialogue. When you have walls, you need someone to sit on the wall and speak to both parties at the same time. And someone who's able to find language which would not deepen the conflict, but reach out to people's hearts and make it possible for them to actually reach out to each other. No matter, in this way, it goes beyond Poles and Jews for today's world, or today's Poland, or today's states. I think on the big plane of things, you can see how, if you can get over what happened here during the Holocaust, you can get over anything. There's no conflict, there's no such an issue which you wouldn't be able to talk through if you are ready to, if you really want to. And I think the division of societies is the big problem, because they are so split in two. And whichever part you are on, you need to see that the other part is just as huge as yours. So you need to talk. You cannot just ask the other party to leave. The countries, it is their country just as much as your country. Poland, before the war, was as much belonging to the Poles as to the Polish Jews. They shared the country, right? And I think this is like the big message from this book, that we need to find new perspectives, new language, new honesty, being able to actually examine ourselves, our own motives, our own thoughts, not just the other side. And I think when the both parties do that, a miracle can happen.
Thank you.
I'd like to sort of jump in, because I think what has changed here is that we now have government bodies functioning as filters and directors of history. It's one thing for individuals to find through honest dialogue and conversation, the platforms on which they can dialogue and discuss with each other. But not only in Poland, but in many places in the world, governments now have intervened. Courts have intervened. And the sense that this is not the dialogue between people who open their hearts to each other, but now a dialogue between people who are paid hacks for a particular political position, creates a new and different search for historical truth, first of all, and then the possibility of conversation. I'm wondering if, I didn't mean for us to make this entirely political, but I wonder if there's a reaction, especially from people as they hear this from the panel.
Well, I have so much to say and probably too much, so I hesitate. But given the fact that I had those 2 years in communist Poland and I experienced such a pushback, and I also experienced heroism. My book talks about that. I learned, my students in particular were willing to entertain the fact that they had been deprived of a proper education, like Tomek in Louise's book, who says, I wasn't told about this. I lived in proximity to a camp and I never even knew about it. But I have been deeply disturbed, to be honest, by the changes in Poland, because here was this nascent democracy. Here was this change. Everything that Louise reports on is the answer to the rescue of hope that I wanted when I went there. And now we have this sharp turn away. And I like what you say, Haim, about who's in charge. I took note. The government as the filter of history. Courts intervene to tell the narrative. It is not the narrative. It is a false narrative. And like Louise said, I too worry about this country, Poland, that I love.
Maybe I could turn this to a question. I'm going to turn it back to Louise. There's a question from a listener from Las Vegas asking about what questions were answered in terms of her personal family narrative. The book goes into that a lot. Maybe you can point to that, Louise. And also, what questions remain for you in terms of questions about your family? What mysteries linger?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that I dreamed of both my parents and my grandmother this morning. They haven't appeared in a very long time, so maybe they're listening in. One way I describe it is that before I went to Poland, my mother couldn't tell me the name of her grandmother. There was really, it really was an emptiness. And I think of that moment in the cemetery in Radomsko where I found was able to see the grave of my great grandmother who blessedly died before the Shoah in that town. And I literally feel more three-dimensional, like there is something here now. There is a history. And just recently, a cousin, David Weiskopf, I don't know if he's listening, but he sent me an amazing family genealogy, which you realize how really have a scope of how deep the family was embedded in Polish society and life, and how extensively. And so I think there's more to discover, certainly, but that was the first kind of phenomenon of how rich it is to be able to reclaim this entwined history that you've been, I think there's a phrase in the book, the rupture is the continuity, like to accept that this rupture has happened and that in that wound we can still find this continuity. And the other phrase, that I think of in terms of this process is naivete. I mean, I think a lot of the honesty in the book is that I'm willing to bear my naivete about Polish history, which was pretty shocking when I went, and it's a very rich and complex history. And I remember Poles saying to me like, "Oh, this is way too complicated. You'll never understand." And the satisfaction and you know, how much there is to learn when I now read Timothy Snyder and read about when you start getting a picture of what Poland went through simultaneously from the East and from the West, you know, the picture just gets more complex and you fill in more details. So I'm still quite a student of this history.
Thank you. I do want to report something similar. When I took my then 35-year-old son to the town my mother's from, Olkusz, one of the smallest, most obscure places in the world, I would say. That similar sense of feeling that you described, Louise, helped him to understand something about the fact that we come from somewhere. I think that many American Jews and Jews come to Poland to find out that there's a context and a place that they come from. And your book, I think, leads us into appreciating the context.
I'll echo Louise and Haim here in my book, Letters to My Father, Excavating a Jewish Identity in Poland and Belarus. I was able finally, like Louise, I found in Okopowa Jewish Cemetery in Warsaw, my great-grandfather's tomb. Again, blessedly, he died before the Shoah. And since then, I've made connections like your cousin, Louise. I have huge connections. I learned that Noah Bendix Bagley is the main violinist in the Berlin Philharmonic. He is the concertmaster, and I'm now in touch with him. And then I've also learned that Jacob Bagley, who died in 1934 and came from Brześć, went with Chagall to Paris, died in 1934 as quite a young man, 43. I am now in touch with his great niece and her daughter, both of whom live in Cologne, Germany, and are both painters. And Jacob's painting forms the cover of my book of a father and child in the forest, which fits. So the idea I have now, I've traced it back to the 1600s, all in the same town in Brześć. And when reading Louise's book and the story of her finding these relatives, and particularly Esther in LA, really moved me because it was in your own backyard, and I have found so many in my own backyard. And going, and then after I left Poland, I continued, I went to Brześć, now Brest in Belarus, as you know, and found my father's birth certificate and also found all the records of my relatives who had been annihilated. So it's amazing when you turn over a small stone, what you discover and what it means, where we come from.
Thank you.
Louise, you've been listening to this conversation. What parts of this book did you leave out that you would have added today?
If I were at it today, well,
Yes.
I think what Marek added was pretty fabulous, about how, I think, Mark, how did you say it in your afterword? I mean, and I'm glad that KARTA, you know, had this edition. You talk about the ingredients for this kind of a dialogue. Do you have it handy, what you wrote? Could you read it to us in English? You're muted, Marek. Yeah, we can
hear you.
Right. Oh, okay. Okay.
for
What he said, what Marek said basically, though, which he added, was just that it takes just a kind of simple willingness to listen, and then he says maybe it's a lifetime commitment to do that, but just the willingness to hear what can be very uncomfortable is very useful, to I mean, Dorota, you can speak to, you spoke to that. I mean, just and I also wanted to credit and mention Cheryl Holtzman, who I think is listening in now, because Cheryl was, and Kathy mentioned Cheryl as well, there was this wonderful conference at Wannsee, which, is notorious for the Wannsee conference, where this group One by One, which was also very influential in this book, where really believes that bringing people together in dialogue among descendants, perpetrators, bystanders. It's a German group. And I met Cheryl at that conference, and she had said, how uncomfortable this conversation made her. She's the daughter of survivors. She said, I would never go to Poland unless someone would take me. And that was the moment I went like, let's go, let's go together. And it was really, I am a descendant of survivors, but she in a much more direct way, because it's her father and mother. So she was much more steeped in the trauma, and I think it was very brave of her to go. And I can also say that the reception of what we learned in Ukraine and Poland, just felt so different. Ukraine was decades behind in any kind of opening up of dialogue, and felt a much darker background to be traveling through. I think whatever I would add, Haim, would come from probably this post-publication part of the book, because that's another era of discovery of the dialogue. Because as Marek said, it goes on. We have so much to learn from each other.
I thought it would be helpful for people, especially in Poland, to hear, Louise, about your version of what you encountered when you traveled to tell people about your book, and the book had just been released. There was some struggle on the part of many of the audiences that you encountered to hear the message of your book.
That's not how, well, I spoke at places. I spoke at Polin Museum. That visit to Poland was places where people, it was with translation, but I found people who came to those readings to be very receptive. They came because they were interested in the book and hungry, actually, to participate in such dialogue. That was my memory of those meetings. That's how I felt it was at Polin. Dorota, I think you were there, right? Yeah.
And should we anticipate a similar tour to Poland?
COVID, it depends. We have to contend with the virus, which is out of our control. But maybe we'll see.
Okay. Well, I think that
mamy na to wielką nadzieję.
Hannah, I'm turning to you. Maybe we should be talking about a time when Louise's book received some public dialogues in Poland. I know that after the pandemic, that would be the time.
Bardzo liczymy na to, że uda nam się zaprosić Louise ciałem do Polski, tak żeby mogła wziąć udział w spotkaniach z polskimi czytelnikami i skonfrontować się z tymi pytaniami, które mogą dla niej mieć. Do tej pory ukazało się kilka recenzji, między innymi w Gazecie Wyborczej, w jednym z większych czy największym i pewnie najważniejszym polskim dzienniku. Kilka dni temu recenzja w wydaniu Newsweek Historia. Mamy też kilka zapytań od dziennikarzy radiowych, telewizyjnych, którzy chcieliby albo z kimś z wydawnictwa, albo właśnie z Louise porozmawiać o tym doświadczeniu. Ale myślę, że ważniejsze nawet niż te reakcje takie medialne są reakcje zwykłych ludzi, którzy zdecydowali po przeczytaniu książki napisać czy to do nas, czy do Louise, jakby podzielić się z tą swoją refleksją. Na mnie największe wrażenie, mam nadzieję, że Louise to potwierdzi, zrobiła osoba, która odpowiedziała w tym swoim liście, w tej reakcji pisemnej, to wysłała to mailem, na pytanie, które zadała w książce Cheryl, czyli na pytanie, czy wam nas brakuje. I ta osoba, ten współczesny dzisiejszy czytelnik, odpowiedziała tak.
That was
Tak.
Cheryl.
To jest dla mnie wielkie wrażenie i bardzo się cieszę, że Cheryl też jest dzisiaj z nami. Ja bym też chciała się dołączyć do tej odpowiedzi i myślę, że tu wiele osób mnie poprze. Tak, brakuje nam was.
It makes me cry.
Thank you. That's very, very important. We've come close now to the conclusion of our conversation. I wanted to give especially Kathy, who had wanted to have a little more time, an opportunity to say a few more things about the book, and would appreciate her sharing some more of her thoughts about the book.
Well, there's so much. You know, on page 95, for those of you who are paying attention in the English translation, Louise mentions Eva Hoffman's book, After Such Knowledge, and that it became a touch point for Cheryl with the metaphor of needles, shards, and pinpricks. And I thought about this in terms of it being sort of the polar opposite on the spectrum of the candle child, which is something that I describe. Someone who is even unconsciously assigned the role in a family to continue the story and to keep memory alive. So they are shards and sharp pinpricks and needles, but there's also this idea, this sort of opposing metaphor of a light, a candle that continues to shine in people even when memory is so stifled and held down. So I thought about that. I also had just a basic question. Why was it that it was, Louise, that the Jews of Radomsko were the first in Poland to receive the cloth patches?
I think they were close to the German border. I don't know, that it came through in you know, it's one of those stories, and we should also acknowledge the Yisker books, which were written right after the war in Yiddish. You know, as a source for so many of these stories, they were the first kind of post-Shoah records by the survivors, and that's where that came from. I haven't tracked that down any further.
I found that very, very interesting, in that for elderly men, they wore the red, meaning they would only work 3 days a week, and for the others who wore yellow, they would have a full week of work. So the other thing that I thought was interesting on page 101 is, how long can you feel the absence? How do we sustain the idea of tensknich, if I can do that? I don't know, Dorota and Hannah, if I can say, to be homesick for. I've always loved that verb. To be homesick for the wonderful Jewish community formerly in Poland. How long can we keep alive this observance of absence? How long can it happen? The other thing that I'd say is where Louise talks about Anthony Appiah's definition of patriotism, and it certainly applies for us here in the United States today, which is both pride and shame, which is in 1988, when I was having my Magister seminar in my flat in Wrocław. This is what I was trying to say to my students, so they wouldn't be alienated. I wanted to show respect for these young people who were so avid and so interested and so open and so fresh, to say, you needn't apologize, but we all need to acknowledge. And of course, this was after 4 months about talking all the sins of America. So then I said, now it's, you know, it's your turn. So that I thought was very important in Louise's book. I thought also Zygmunt Bauman's statement on Jedwabne, that's on page 160. The issue is not whether the Poles should feel ashamed or whether they should feel proud of themselves. The choice is not between shame and pride. The choice is between the morally purifying shame and the shame of morally devastating pride. This was so central to my teaching from 87 to 89, and it was so important to find Louise's research on that and to bring that forward. I thought that the conversation with Kostik Giebert was brilliant. I keep rereading it for his answers because I learned a lot there. So I would strongly advise people to look at that. Let me see if there's anything else.
Kathy, I'm going to say that in good tradition of English teachers that I know and love, you have directed us to our homework, which is to read the book, whether in Polish or in English, and appreciate very much the efforts of the panel. I'm going to give Louise a moment for the last word before we announce our next program. Perhaps other panelists would like to say a final word as well. Louise.
Just again, this group effort, I want to thank all the people on this journey. I know there was one question about you'll find there's a chapter about a rescuer in my family's town, Marian Bareska, which is a very moving story, and how incomprehensible it was to me as an American Jew that he hadn't been celebrated yet as a hero. And I think it speaks to what Kathy was pointing out, that we have to remember that during the communist era, this was not a meritorious thing to talk about, having rescued Jews. So there's a lot that's counterintuitive to us Americans, and it was a great satisfaction to see this person be celebrated by Yad Vashem. So thank you, Hannah, thank you, Dorota, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Beit Polska, for supporting this book and this dream to bring it to a Polish audience. And I look forward to more conversation with all of you.
Dorota, a final word?
I think I would like to relate to what Kathy said about, and the question which actually Louise had asked, how long can we observe absence? I think we can do it as long as it turns into presence. We actually, our discussion makes it present somehow. We fill out this absent, empty space with our presence, living presence.
Thank you, Dorota. And Hannah, please.
Ja jeszcze raz podziękuję Louise i Dorocie za to, że mieliśmy przywilej opublikować tę książkę. I odpowiadając na pytanie, takie zdziwienie, dlaczego teraz, skoro jest tak źle w Polsce, to wydaje mi się, że to jest właśnie najlepszy czas, żeby po prostu mówić o tych sprawach i jakby nie udawać, że tematu nie ma, że właśnie im jest gorzej na zewnątrz, tym my powinniśmy jako zwykli pojedynczy ludzie mieć w sobie siłę, żeby jakoś się temu przeciwstawiać. I też po to jest ta książka.
Our next program is August 8th. It is a program that will introduce you to a book by Barry Cohen, introduced by Professor Polanski, Antoni Polanski, the Dean of Polish Historians, who will be participating in the panel on August 8th. Details will be available. We invite you to register for that conversation. This book describes the lives of 3 generations of Jews who remained in Poland, and their lives from 1945, actually from shortly before the beginning of the war, to the present day. It's wonderfully delivered with discussions and a transcript of the discussions, as well as a beautiful photography of the individuals. We're not going to be able to listen to all 54 people, but we will have a number of them participate with us. And we hope that you will be a participant in our program, Shared Legacies. And we look forward to learning more about our past in Poland. I'm going to give the last word to our chair, Marek Józefowski, who I hope can move from being a translator to saying goodbye to everyone. And I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank Louise Steinman and everyone that's participated.
I need to wait, I think, before I'm switched back, or I can speak now.
You are switched back.
We hear you.
Okay, but whether Marzena hears me is important here. Okay, fine. So as Haim Beliak said, we are truly satisfied with this session, which, by the way, we plan to expand on in a matter of months. We want to repeat this session, or not exactly repeat, but as I said, expand on it, because we hope that within a month or 2 or 3, there will be more active readers of the book, and not only in Poland, which is obvious because we've just had the publication, but hopefully we have interested you as listeners to this panel, participants in this panel, in this webinar, to pick up the original in English and to read through the book for yourselves, and then join us with new questions or new insights that you want to share with us on the subject. Meanwhile, thank you very much, particularly to the sources of our experience. And Louise, thank you for sharing a text with us that has come from you directly, and that touches, it is now apparent, touches hearts of not only American Jewry with Polish past, but also Poles who are coming to grips with their joined Polish-Jewish past. And vis-a-vis the absence, the question of absence and Jewish absence in Poland, well, our presence of Polish Jews in Poland testifies to the fact that the gap is, to be it minuscule, be it minor or minority, is still being created anew, or we cannot hope of recreating the past, but we can create a new future for ourselves and for the Poles among whom we are living and sharing a culture and civilization together. Thank you all very much for your engagement.